May I invite you to take your seats? Good afternoon. I'm Marshall Bouton, President of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. And on behalf of the Council, I would like to welcome you warmly to today's luncheon with Her Excellency Meera Shankar, the Ambassador of the Republic of India to the United States. Ambassador will be introduced to you a little bit later after lunch, but I just wanted to say a word that I've had the privilege of having my professional path cross hers at a number of points during her very distinguished diplomatic career, including her periods of service in Washington prior to this one. And I think many of us in this room know, in general terms, the extraordinary quality of people that India is fortunate to have in its foreign service. And Meera Shankar is certainly among the most distinguished and accomplished of that extraordinary group of people. So we are all fortunate at this particular moment, especially to have a person of her caliber and dedication serving her country in our capital. We want you to be aware, Madam Ambassador, I think you're probably no doubt already aware, but to underscore the role that Chicago plays, particularly in the U.S.-India economic relationship. And I think I can attest to the fact, I've been here 8 years, that in that period alone, the depth and breadth of the relationships between the great American companies headquartered in Chicago and India has expanded practically exponentially. And we have in this room today represented many of those companies, some of which, of course, have been long involved in India, others more newly, but also deeply involved. So this is a very vital connection. Again, I don't need to tell you, Ambassador Shankar, since you had these responsibilities in your embassy at an earlier time, that there was a time when the business relationship, the commercial, the trading relationships, the investment flow relationship between the United States and India was thin. And I used to say that the India-US relationship needs ballast in the ship. We have a wonderful ship here, but it often would get blown off course by the winds of political differences and events, and both governments would then work very hard to pull the ship off the rocks and get it back out to open sea again. And I've long contended that that would be less likely to happen. All nations, all governments have their differences from time to time, were we to have more ballast in the ship. What you see in front of you is an important part of the ballast that is now in the Indo-US ship, that commercial relationship between our two nations represented here. For example, the state of Illinois alone in 2008 exported in goods and services to India about $700 million worth of those goods and services. And over 50 Illinois-based companies are currently operating in India. And 15 companies, and this is a newer and also exciting fact, and our lead sponsor today, Navistar, is an example. Increasingly, we have Indian companies and Indian companies forming joint ventures with American companies here in Chicago. And I would add that the economic ties and the potential for growth in those ties is even greater if you look at the region of which Chicago is capital, the great heartland of the United States. Now, I want to underscore that this is not by any means only an economic partnership, and a dynamic one at that, but a strengthening strategic and societal partnership between our two countries. I thought at the G20 summit in London, when President Obama and Prime Minister Singh back in April spoke about broadening the relationship in the fields of science and technology, energy, agriculture, economic engagement more generally, and also education, I would underscore. They pointed to some very important areas in which the ballast in the ship could be increased further. We have, again, you know well, in this great city, 2 world-class universities, both of which also already have important connections to India, ones that can be further increased. I want to thank the Delhi Committee of Chicago Sister Cities International for serving as our cooperating sponsor for this event. The Delhi Committee has been one of the most active and dynamic committees of the Chicago Sister Cities organization, which is one of Mayor Daley's highest priorities. We established the relationship between Chicago and Delhi in 2001, and under the superb leadership of Smita Shah, who sends her regrets, Ambassador Shankar could not be here today. That relationship between our 2 cities has grown apace over the last several years. I want to thank our lead corporate sponsor, Navistar, for their generous support of the event. They're represented here today by Phil Chrisman, who will introduce, as I mentioned, introduce the ambassador after lunch. And I would like to thank as well the supporting sponsors of the lunch, the Boeing Company, Harley-Davidson, and Caterpillar. Their support and collaboration with the Council in these and other respects means a great deal to us. Now I would like to recognize and invite to the podium the Consul General of India in Chicago, Ashok Kumar Attri. I'm sure many of you know him already, and we're delighted to have him. Madam Ambassador, I can attest to you that he is serving your government very, very ably here in Chicago. Ashok.
Namaskar, a very good afternoon to all of you, and a very warm welcome to Ambassador Meera Shankar here in Chicagoland and the Midwest. I would like to convey our appreciation to Dr. Marshall Bouton and Chicago Council on Global Affairs for arranging this interaction. It is important that the movers and shakers of business and industry and the thinkers of this great city get this opportunity of engagement with Ambassador Meera Shankar. Ambassador Shankar will be introduced more fully a little later by Phil, but I would just like to fill in some important details and also opportunities I have had of interaction with her in the past. The most important part is Ambassador Meera Shankar was born on 9th of October. We feel gratified that such an important day in the year of her life she has chosen to spend with us here in Chicago. Thank you, Meera. She has had a number of, in fact, a long string of extremely important diplomatic assignments in India and overseas. She has spent considerable time in Prime Minister's office in crucial responsibility during Rajiv Gandhi's prime ministership and later on. And she has more recently been Ambassador of India to Germany. She has moved from Berlin to Washington, D.C. But I recall with great pleasure the very intense interaction I had opportunity of when she was chief of SAARC division in the Foreign Office, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. And I happened to be on loan to help manage the SAARC Secretariat, the multilateral secretariat based in Kathmandu. That's a period we had continuous engagement, a series of conferences and other meetings and so on. And we were able to take SAARC cooperation a couple of notches higher. Those who know the South Asian region also know that it is quite a challenge to promote economic and trade cooperation in the SAARC region. We are able to get SAARC preferential trading arrangement operationalized and commenced a discussion on SAARC free trade area, and also diversified our cooperation there in many fields. I have always been very, very appreciative and very grateful for the support I got from Meera during that assignment. She has been the Chief of Cultural Diplomacy of India, as Director General of Indian Council for Cultural Relations. So as you see, it has been an extremely diverse portfolio she has brought to Washington, D.C. She is not unfamiliar with the Chicagoland, but she is looking forward to renew the acquaintances and also fill up the details of what has happened after her assignment in early 90s in Washington, D.C. as Chief of Commerce Department in the Indian Embassy as Minister of Commerce. So we are all looking forward to a nice meal here and hearing Meera and the question and answer. I would again thank all the dignitaries, all the important members of captains of business and industry of the government who are gathered here. Thank you very much indeed.
One final note, I suspect that Ambassador Shankar knows this already, but I think every Indian student somehow comes to learn of this. In 1893, Swami Vivekananda came to Chicago to participate in the Great Columbian Exposition that marked this city's emergence onto the world stage. And in case you didn't know, not far from here is a Swami Vivekananda Way. And I hope this CG will take you by there as you travel around the city. Please enjoy your lunch. We'll be back to you shortly.
It's great to be here today, and I'm very happy to be here and represent Navistar in front of this distinguished group of Chicago civic and business leaders. And more importantly, pleased for the opportunity to discuss the importance of U.S. and India relations with the ambassador today. Just a little bit about Navistar before we get started. Many of you recall our legacy company going back more than 100 years, headquartered in Chicago. At that time, we were called International Harvester. And today, Navistar is one of the largest makers of commercial trucks, buses, and diesel engines in the world. And we're entering new markets around the world, growing our company in new and innovative ways. India is an important growth market for us. For Navistar, we're proud of our long-standing relationship with the government and our in-country clients. In particular, we have a joint venture agreement with Mahindra & Mahindra to produce diesel engines, commercial trucks, and buses for India and export. And I'm proud to say this year we begin production in our new facility in Chakan. This afternoon, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing the ambassador. We're certainly privileged that Ambassador Shankar to have you here with us this afternoon in Chicago for this discussion. Let me take a moment to mention some of the ambassador's accomplishments. She was appointed Ambassador of India to the United States. She is India's first lady ambassador to the U.S. in nearly 6 decades, since 1949. Prior to her Washington, D.C. posting, she served as ambassador to Germany from December 2005 to April 2009. During her career, she has held numerous distinguished positions in government, including serving as Additional Secretary for Counterterrorism, directing India's engagement with the South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation at the Ministry of External Affairs. Ms. Shankar served as Minister of Commerce at the Embassy in Washington, D.C. from 1991 to 1995 and as a director in the Prime Minister's office from 1985 to 1991. She also headed the India Council of Cultural Relations in New Delhi and directed India's cultural diplomacy. Her appointment comes at a time when U.S.-India relations are reaching a new phase. Indicative of this close relationship, the U.S. Senate India Caucus took the opportunity to welcome the ambassador to Washington in July. A warm, welcoming reception held in her honor marked the first time the caucus has held such an event for an Indian ambassador. Ambassador, we look forward to hearing your thoughts this afternoon on the next phase of India-U.S. relations. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Meera Shankar, Ambassador of India to the United States.
Marshal Bouton and the Chicago Council of World Affairs, my friend who gave the introduction, a very generous one, I must say. It's a great pleasure for me to be here on this rainy Chicago afternoon. But I'm sure that at some stage the sun will come out. Here in Chicago, as Mr. Bouton mentioned, in September 1893, Swami Vivekananda, the Indian philosopher, sage, made a fervent appeal for the unity of mankind. Today, thousands of people from India are part of Chicago's incredible diversity and its indefatigable energy. Now, India-US relations play themselves out in the universities, offices, laboratories, homes, and the Mahatma Gandhi Street of this great city. Let me say that Chicago is well known in India, both for its stock market as also for its jazz. But today, of course, I think Chicago should be proud that one of your citizens, President Barack Obama, has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So I suppose that somewhere in the deep core of people from Chicago, there's an instinctive preference for peace as well. The India-US relationship draws so much of its strength from the vision, enterprise, and efforts of people and partnerships outside the two capitals and the two governments. Therefore, I always look forward to a chance for an interaction outside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. I'm particularly grateful for this invitation and the opportunity to talk to you. Dr. Marshal Bouton, through your long association with India, you have seen this relationship through many good and difficult times. And I am sure that you are delighted with the transformation in the relationship in the last decade, to which you made an important contribution. Our relationship rests on a solid bedrock of shared values and beliefs, and now increasingly has the character that the world's two largest democracies, defined by pluralism, rule of law, individual liberty, and enterprise, should share. The end of the Cold War and the transformational economic reforms undertaken by India in 1991 created new circumstances and opened new opportunities for our relationship. Leaders on both sides have provided the commitment and energy for our countries to develop and build on these opportunities. In the course of a remarkable journey over the past decade, our political dialogue has expanded, our strategic understanding has deepened, and our cooperation has extended to new frontiers. We have created a new framework of cooperation and turned constraints of the past into opportunities for the future. We now have over 25 bilateral mechanisms for consultation and cooperation, the highest that India has with any country in the world. The Civil Nuclear Agreement was a powerful symbol of the ground that we have covered. It not only addressed a major irritant in our relationship that prevented us from realizing the full strategic and economic potential of our relationship, but It would also help to boost political ties and economic partnership, help us address energy security and climate change, and pursue a more productive partnership on non-proliferation. Our militaries, once unfamiliar with each other, now hold regular dialogue and joint exercises. We coordinate anti-piracy efforts and have worked together on humanitarian missions. Our defense trade was negligible a decade ago. We placed orders worth US $3.5 billion last year for defense equipment, and this could grow even more in the future as India is looking to build its defense capabilities in a new paradigm with increasing participation of the private sector and 26% for foreign direct investment. So the opportunities for partnership in the defense sector between Indian companies and US companies are a new field which we should work together to develop and exploit. Defense relationships, of course, are not merely a commercial transaction. They reflect mutual confidence and a long-term strategic relationship. Our counterterrorism cooperation has acquired new momentum and depth after the Mumbai terrorist attacks in November 2008. We have also, in yet another sign of mutual confidence, overcome concerns of the past on India's space program and have made a promising beginning to a new era of cooperation. Indeed, the Chandrayaan moon mission of India carried a US experimental payload. We are now looking at putting in place the final nuts and bolts which would enable us to implement the nuclear agreement between India and the United States. The 123 agreement provided for advance consent for India to reprocess spent fuel. We are currently engaged in discussing the arrangements for this reprocessing as provided in our bilateral agreement. We've had one round of discussions. The second round would be due to take place shortly, and both sides feel that the dialogue has gone well and that we should be able to take this to its logical fruition fairly shortly. With this in place, we would be well poised to actually have nuclear commerce between India and the United States. The strength of ties between our governments is matched by the vitality of private partnerships and the warmth of ties between our people. It now rests on the durable foundation of broad-based political support and public goodwill in both countries. Our economic ties have already demonstrated the enormous potential. The US is today our largest trading partner in goods and services, though of course China is the largest if we take goods alone. It is also the largest source of technology collaborations for Indian companies. India-US trade has doubled just in the last 5 years. US exports to India have grown 3 times during the same period. Of course, this year there has been a downturn because of the constriction of the US economy, but we hope that as the recession in the US bottoms out and the financial situation stabilizes and growth begins to return, that we will see a reversal of this shrinkage. Our trade in services is also growing rapidly and, more important, is balanced in both directions. while India exported $9.6 billion worth of services to the US in turn exported $9.3 billion worth of services to India. Though the US is the largest source of foreign direct investments in India, the levels are relatively modest, and there is considerable potential for this to grow as the Indian economy expands. A significant feature is that our economic ties are growing in both directions. Indian direct investment into the US has been growing rapidly and, in fact, on the basis of annual flows, exceeds US foreign direct investment into India in recent years. In 2007, 2008 alone, an estimated US dollars 10.25 billion was invested by Indian companies in the US, which, according to industry estimates, created an additional 65,000 jobs in the US. This trend is expected to continue as Indian companies increasingly seek to position themselves in the global economy. A significant part of this investment is in the manufacturing sector, which demonstrates a level of confidence in the industrial future of the United States. In this regard, I think it may be useful to mention that the Indian economy has performed relatively well in the global economic crisis. We initially thought we would not be affected because our financial sector was strong and our lending parameters quite prudent, and our financial sector was not affected. But we were hit by the secondary impact of the crisis as foreign institutional investors withdrew money from the Mumbai stock market. Indian stock values went down, and that in turn had a spillover effect on the real economy. We also faced a credit crunch because a number of Indian companies were expanding on the basis of external commercial borrowings. These dried up, export credit dried up, and this coincided with a period of very high interest rates in India because the bank was trying to deal with inflationary pressures at the beginning of the year. So in some sense, it was a double squeeze. On the one hand, you had the recession in all three major economies simultaneously, Europe, Japan, and the US, and a constriction in the Indian economy because of the high interest rates. But the government took fairly timely measures to stimulate demand through a series of cuts in excise duties, as well as a 4% across-the-board cut in value-added tax, and through pointed procurement decisions by the government itself to stimulate demand in sectors which were seeing a slump. The net result is that India was still able to grow during the crisis, even though our growth moderated. We had achieved an average of about 9% growth in GDP for 4 years prior to the economic crisis. Last year, after the crisis, our growth was 6.7%, which is, I think, a fairly respectable rate of growth in the global circumstances. This year, we're hopeful that our growth will be between 6 to 6.5%, but the ultimate objective of the government is to get back to a growth path of 8 to 10%. Of course, we have, in our relationship with the US, very strong assets in terms of people. The 2.7 million strong Indian American community, the 95,000 Indian students in the US, the partnerships that are flourishing across many fields of human endeavor, and the growing traffic of people in both directions have had a profound impact on the relationship. If we sense great excitement and goodwill in this relationship, it is because people are at the heart of these ties and, in many ways, are leading the governments to think of new ways to advance our relationship. Over the past few months, as the new administration assumed office in Washington, D.C., and the government returned with a renewed and stronger mandate in Delhi, the process of engagement has continued to make seamless progress. We have had a series of ministerial visits covering areas from counterterrorism to environment. During Secretary of State Clinton's July 2009 visit to India, we charted out a new roadmap and put in place a revised dialogue architecture to reflect our emerging priorities and focus. Under this new architecture, the Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister will oversee the strategic dialogue. And we have added to the existing dialogues in defense, trade policy, finance and economy, as well as strategic issues, global issues, ongoing Foreign Office consultations. We have added the social sectors. So now there will also be a dialogue on education, health, and women's empowerment. This, in a sense, would make the dialogue a truly broad-based one, covering political issues, strategic issues, economic and trade issues, as well as social issues. On November 24th, this year, President Obama will host Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh as his first state guest. The next phase of the relationship will be marked by continuity and would be a period of consolidation and expansion as we seek to build on the important progress that we have made, pursue the opportunities that it has opened, and as we respond to the emerging challenges of our times. Our economic ties will receive high priority. In India, we remain committed to and confident of returning to a growth trajectory of 8 to 10% per year. The progress of 1/6 of humanity, driven largely by domestic demand and savings, represents a huge economic opportunity and one of the anchors of global economic prosperity. As an example, according to a study, India still has to build about 80% of the infrastructure that it would need by 2030. Our investments in infrastructure alone over the next 5 years would require, at the very least, $500 billion at Indian prices, providing enormous opportunities for business partners around the world, including the United States. The United States remains the world's largest economy and continues to be at the forefront of innovation, discovery, and enterprise. India will continue to look to the United States as a major development partner. We will continue to work with the US and others for an open, stable, global trading regime that is a positive-sum game, reflecting a fair and equitable balance of interest for all. At the Pittsburgh summit of the G20, we have begun to take the first steps towards creating new structures of global economic governance that reflect the imperatives of the 21st century global economy, with agreement to reform the governance structure at the IMF and World Bank. This is a positive development, but there is considerable ground to traverse. We will also seek to build an innovative and vibrant partnership for developing clean, renewable, affordable, and reliable energy supplies, and improving energy efficiency. It is important for India's economic future, energy security, and environmental conservation. In the pursuit of a greener future, the India-US partnership could in turn be of great mutual economic benefit and help us assume leadership in green technologies. We intend to install 20,000 megawatts of solar energy by 2020, increase nuclear energy from 4,000 megawatts to 20,000 megawatts by 2020, and substantially expand wind energy and biomass energy. Energy efficiency would also be another key objective, because we believe that if we are able to make a dent there, we could have 25% additional power without adding to generating capacity. India's expanding economy offers immense opportunities in all these areas, and we hope that US companies will look at these areas actively. Science and technology, education and research, enterprise and innovation are the common thread that will link all our joint endeavors of the future. That is why I believe that critical to our future relationship will be a new emphasis on science and technology collaborations and partnerships in higher education. This is an area of enormous potential given the emphasis on higher education and on science in our two countries. India is poised to undertake higher education reform. This is one sector which has not really been touched by reform so far, and we see that the shortfall between demand in India and the availability of higher education has grown, with the result that we have 95,000 Indian students in the United States, another 95,000 in Australia, many in the UK, many in Canada, and we would like to see that there are opportunities for many of these students to study productively in India. The government in India has announced a slew of new institutions that it will be funding directly. 30 new central universities, 8 new institutes of technology, 8 new institutes of information technology, institutes of advanced science, institutes of management. And in setting up these institutions or new innovation centers, the Indian government would welcome partnerships from US institutions and universities. These partnerships could be by way of helping us to design course curriculums, by way of committing a certain number of man hours for academic exchanges, exchanges of technical experts. The US played an important role in developing the institutes of technology in India, particularly IIT Kanpur and IIT Kharagpur were built and developed as centers of excellence with this kind of partnership commitment from US universities. And as we establish these new institutions in India, we hope that we can recreate these partnerships for mutual benefit. But looking beyond the institutions which the government is setting up, while the full range of possibilities will become clearer once the contours of our educational reform have been put in place, the intention of these reforms is to create opportunities for private-public partnerships. And then I think there would be a much broader range of opportunities for US institutions and universities to look at the Indian higher education sector. We are also developing the whole vocational skill area. A major expansion and upgradation of this sector has been announced by the government because this will be crucial to creating employable skills in the bulk of our people who do not have higher education. And again, I think that there is an opportunity to partner and cooperate here between US community colleges or industry associations which are engaged in training, because we are trying to build these vocational skills in a different way than we have done in the past, in collaboration with industry, so that at the end of the day, people who emerge from these courses have employable skills, rather than in the bureaucratic way in which we've done this in the past. So many of our chambers of commerce, many of our industry associations are actually tying up with foreign partners for designing upgraded course curricula for this training. And the Europeans have been a little faster than the US here. I think the UK has signed skill development partnership agreements with our chambers of commerce, so has Germany. And I think that there's an opportunity here which should be looked at. We have made an encouraging start in the area of science and technology with an agreement in July 2009 to launch an India-US Science and Technology Endowment Fund of US $30 million with equal contributions from both sides. In 2006, we launched an e-learning initiative that brought 20 leading universities into collaboration with 42 technical institutions in India. We will now seek to create a framework for substantive partnerships looking beyond these agreements. Later this month, India's Minister of Human Resource Development will visit the US to advance this goal. Even as we focus on the economy, environment, energy, education, enterprise, and empowerment, we will also seek closer partnership in meeting our increasingly convergent interest on traditional, unconventional, and new challenges. The locus of so many of the global challenges runs through India's extended neighborhood. We have shared interests in maintaining global stability, countering terrorism and violent extremism, preventing further proliferation, ensuring the security of sea lanes of communication, and finding ways in which fragile states do not become a source of threat and instability to their own people and the world. We have vital stakes in the stability, unity, and prosperity of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and in the elimination of extremist sanctuaries in this region. India is contributing significantly to development efforts in Afghanistan with $1.2 billion in development assistance, which is bringing power, education, roads, and health to the Afghan people. We believe that there is need for sustained engagement in Afghanistan to bring stability and moderation to this region. Our partnership with the US is not directed against or influenced by any other country, and it does not affect India's relations with any other country. We do not see this relationship in traditional paradigms. The threats we face are multiple, unpredictable, and often simultaneous. Our interdependence is also increasing our shared vulnerabilities. No one country can address them alone. We have to work together more closely. Drawing on the strength of their own diversities, India and the United States could be a bridge in the interconnected world and work to shape the emerging global order on the principles of consensus, coexistence, and cooperation. That must also translate into reshaping the global security and political architecture, including the UN Security Council, to reflect the emerging realities and make these institutions more effective and capable of responding to our collective challenges. As we chart our course for the next decade, our bilateral agenda will be broad-based and will respond to the challenges of the 21st century. As governments, we will fulfill our responsibility in strengthening our political, strategic, and security cooperation, but above all, we must do everything to create a framework that unleashes the economic potential for bilateral cooperation. Our shared values, convergent interests, the progress that we have made in recent years, and the sense of excitement, goodwill, and purpose that we see in our relationship gives us the confidence in the future of the India-US relationship. Its success will be important to our people as also to those with whom we share this planet. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Ambassador Shankar, for a very thoughtful and wide-ranging address. Floor is open for your questions. Usual council procedure, if you'd please raise your hand, and when I recognize you, if you would please wait until the microphone gets to you. Very briefly identify yourself and state your question, and we will then direct it to the ambassador. Well, I've got two at the back table here. Let's start with Roshan Goel.
I'm Roshan Goel, and Ambassador, thank you for such a nice talk. And my question is, what is the one most significant thing
Pardon?
U.S. business leaders can do to take our relationship to the next level?
What's the most significant thing that they can do to take it?
I would say, look at Indian infrastructure investment, because for India, that's the key. But I wouldn't even focus on one single issue, because the opportunities are multiple, and focus on the opportunities. I mentioned that the Indian economy has done reasonably well in the current crisis. We are seeing also this confidence in the Indian economy reflected in the fact that despite the recession, last year we received a total of $35 billion in foreign direct investment, an increase over the previous year, despite the recession. This was not the same for portfolio investment, where, as I said, institutional investors withdrew money from the stock market because of their own liquidity pressures back at home. But this year, we have again seen that portfolio investment has returned, and the net inflows are into India rather than out, and in quite a substantive manner. FDI inflows are again very substantial. Between April, May, and June, in the first quarter, I think we received something like $10 billion worth of FDI, which is again, I think, quite significant given the continuing recession in all three major economies. I think the Indian economy is at a kind of tipping point. And the two constraints we really face are infrastructure, which shaves about 1% of our GDP, and therefore constricts our ability to grow to our full potential. The second is social development, because unless we can provide education and health to our people, I think, again, they will not be in a position to really develop their full potential. The third element would be agriculture, and I think this would be of interest to companies here, I know in Chicago, who have such a strong agricultural connection, because for India, growing the agricultural sector to make the next leap in productivity gains there is a key national objective. We want to build the economy on 3 legs: services, industry, and agriculture. The services sector, IT sector, business process outsourcing sector, has been the sector which has leapt the first. It was the first to see this leap in growth after connecting to the global economy. Industry actually faced a problem because they were so sheltered and protected that when we opened, many of them faced a real challenge, and many small and medium companies went under. But now they've restructured. And for instance, in small cars, India has emerged as the world's biggest hub for production of small fuel-efficient cars. There's the Nano, which Tatas have produced, which has become a game changer in the way automobiles are conceived and produced and how they are costed. But Suzuki has its largest global hub for producing small cars in India, not Japan. All other car makers, whether it's Volkswagen or it is Renault or it is Toyota or it is the South Koreans, Hyundai, are either producing or have plans to produce in India. Allied to this, we've developed capabilities in in the automobile component segment, then in the whole field of generic drugs, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, also in the infrastructure-related industries of steel, cement, aluminum. But we need to carry this process forward and also bring about improvements in productivity in some of the labor-intensive industries. The third leg will be agriculture. And here we need to put in place the logistic supply chains, create the infrastructure in rural areas which would enable these to be put in place so that we can build forward and backward linkages through food processing, through agribusinesses, between the rural and urban economy. Now, in all these sectors, I think there are opportunities because the Indian economy is broad-based. It's not just a single commodity economy or a few commodities economy. So I would encourage US companies and business to look at India seriously. It's going to be one of the big opportunities of this century.
Thank you. Yes, Loring.
Loring Nabla. Strikes me that U.S. citizens and people have traditionally been quite inward-looking, and that's a problem for our country. As a result, our government at times has been too inward-looking, and that particularly applies to our relationships with India. It does seem, as we look at the last few administrations, that that is beginning to change. I wonder if you see the Obama administration coming to India with more vigor, with more interest, with more knowledge, more understanding. Is it really going to be qualitatively different? And secondly, in my many trips to India, I've always thought that tourism was a very much an untapped resource for India. So many wonderful and interesting things to see, but it's a hard place to travel to in terms of the airports particularly and the hotels and some of the other things you need to develop if you're going to build tourism. Do you see India doing that in the future as a way to help build the economy?
Yes, certainly. I think tourism is recognized as a sector which has the potential to have spillover benefits in the economy by way of suppliers, chains, by way of employment generation, both directly and indirectly. And it's an area of focus. I agree, we need to do more on infrastructure in redeveloping the airports. We do have now redeveloped airports at Bangalore and Hyderabad. There are new airports which have been commissioned. I would joke with the Germans who took a long time making up their mind whether to have an international airport at Schönefeld in Berlin. And I would say you take, 15 years to make or 9 years to make up your mind to build an international airport. We've built one in Bangalore in 5 years, but then we take 10 years to build the connecting road. No, so I think for us it's very important to improve our systems, to improve our logistics, to encourage investment in the hotel sector. We are encouraging this across the board, from 5 stars, particularly to 3 and 4 stars, where we have a real shortfall. And also budget hotels, which would really be required for encouraging national tourism. Amongst our infrastructure proposals are to upgrade the national airports, the international airports. As I said, Bangalore and Hyderabad have been done. Delhi is currently underway with a consortium, and all these have been done through private-public partnerships with investment by the promoters for redeveloping the airport and a long-term lease for them to operate the airport. But this is the model we are following more for the metropolitan airports. Then there are, I think, over 36 or so small state-level airports which we will be developing. Beyond that, there are 80 or so landing strips which the erstwhile princes used to have for their planes to descend. And those also will be redeveloped, at least to undertake, to be able to take charters where there is a tourism potential. It's an area with a great deal of promise.
Did you want to respond to the first part of his question?
Which was?
About the
Obama
Obama administration engaging?
Yes. I think in the beginning there was some concern that there could be some dilution of the relationship with the changes in administration and government in on both sides. But we have been, the Secretary of State has said that the Obama administration is committed to building on the achievements which were made and to taking this relationship to the next level. On the Indian side, the government of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh is committed to carry forward this relationship. I think what will be important as we move ahead is that both governments keep their focus on the relationship, because there are many other crises and immediate preoccupations which can, in a sense, divert that focus.
Jatinder.
Your Excellency, my name is Jatinder Bedi. We all are so honored to see you amongst us in Chicago. You have mentioned in your speech the changing paradigm as regards the defense equipment which you're buying from United States. I take you back towards India. What we see happening on the China and India borders and what we read in the papers, my question is, how certain is Indian government, knowing well the Chinese intentions of the past, that China will not attack India? And at the same time, in case it does, how prepared is the Indian Armed Forces to contain that attack and launch a counterattack?
I would also draw your attention to the fact that the government of India has said that the reports were alarmist and did not necessarily reflect the facts on the ground, and that we did not notice any significant change in the pattern from previous years. So I think I should start by saying that the government has said that the news reports on this account were alarmist and not based on facts. Our Prime Minister has said that the world is large enough to have two big economies like that of India and China growing simultaneously. And if they continue to grow, they could also become engines for the global economy. Having said that, I think the border negotiations with China have proved to be more dilatory than we would have hoped. We have upgraded the level of the dialogue to a political level, but in all these years, what we have been able to achieve is an agreement to maintain peace and tranquility in the border areas, and an agreement on the principles that should govern a border settlement.
Is there a question on this side? I saw a hand earlier, but maybe it's the question's been answered. No? Yes, please.
My name is Mohan Jain. I'm the founder president of India Development Coalition of America. It's a group of NRIs and PIOs who are working on social development projects in India. And many of them last 10 or 15, 20 years, they've done wonderful work. And what we would like to see that we can, how we inspire more NRI, PRIs to engage in that area, and what support your office can provide for that one. We have been doing here, and we have been inspiring and engaging more people, bringing them that to take care of your village, and we try to support you for that. And we would like to see how your office can help us. Thank you.
The Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs has been established, and they have actually an agency to help NRIs and others who want to contribute to India's development through social donations and contributions. They have an agency which does this, and we can certainly put you in touch with them. There are also a range of private NGOs active in the Indian, we have a range of them, and very interesting microfinance and self-help groups operating in all the villages. For instance, the Self-Employed Women's Association, SEVA, of Ila Bhatt, who's a Gandhian leader, began by trying to help women who operated, who sold things on the street to be able to have access to credit. And they would contribute a certain percentage of their savings. No matter what they earned, they would contribute a certain percentage. And today, SEVA has grown into a very big organization, which is active all over India. So like this, there are some very well-established NGOs active in the Indian framework. And another route, if you don't want to go through government, is to go through one of these established NGOs.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to close it off then. The ambassador has been very generous with her time. She has other commitments here in Chicago. I want to thank you, Madam Ambassador, for taking the time, especially on your birthday, to come to Chicago and to share your time and your thoughts with us. As I said at the outset of our meeting, there's enormous resources and interest here in Chicago for the further development of the India-U.S. relationship. We hope to see you here often, as well as your colleagues in the government of India. And if there is anything that we at the Council and many organizations here today can do to help that progress move forward, we stand ready. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask you to join with me in thanking Ambassador Shankar.
Thank you.